This is Christopher John Björkness. It is May 31st, 2023. I depend upon your contributions to produce these videos, which I put up on the internet for free, and to engage in my research for my books. Please consider contributing. I can't do it without you. There are contribution links in the description below and at my website, cjbbooks.com. Thank you very much, and thank you so much to those of you who have already given. It has helped me out tremendously, and I am very, very grateful to you. I'm calling this one, Abraham Sold the World to Satan. The Abrahamic covenant is quite literally a deal with the devil. It is a binding contract between the Israelites and the satanic Egyptian god Seth. The agreement states that if the Israelites worship Seth and feed him the firstborn of the Egyptians, then Seth will give the Israelites the Egyptian empire and make their king the ruler of the entire world. And the Israelites will be the priests of the only religion that will be left on earth after all the other gods are killed off. The monotheistic religion of Israel is officially the fear of Seth and absolute obedience to his divine murderous mandates. Seth is angry and jealous because his brother Horus stole his throne in the pantheon of Egyptian gods. The Egyptians, meaning everyone who rejected Seth, must be exterminated because they betrayed Seth, the god of darkness and chaos, and worship in his place beautiful Horus, the god of light and order. Since the firstborn Egyptians rejected their god Seth, Seth wages war on the Egyptians and chose the Israelites to be his army and second-born holy people who will rule the world from the Egyptian empire of Greater Israel. That is the hidden, coded narrative of the Torah. But the Israelites must obey Seth, or he will do to them what he plans to do to the Egyptians and all Gentiles. That was the deal that Abraham made with the devil Seth. Seth then gave Moses the law with 10 official commandments and 613 mitzvot, which would make the Israelites masters of the universe if they obeyed Seth's law. The Egyptians worshipped their gods in their sacred temples. The Egyptian priests fed those gods sacrifices and preserved the divine animals of those holy Egyptian gods. Foreigners came who worshipped Seth. The Hyksos conquered Egypt and exerted angry Seth's wrath on the firstborn Egyptians who had abandoned Seth and instead worshipped his brother Horus. The Hyksos forced the priests of the Egyptians to sacrifice their divine animals in their holy temples and then eat them. The Hyksos destroyed the holy temples of the Egyptians after first desecrating them. The Egyptians then wrote books of magic and practiced divine rituals to thwart Seth and his foreign minions. The Egyptians did to the slaves of Seth what they had done to the Egyptians, which only made the foreigners and rebels fear Seth, their god, even more, because Seth had told them that he was punishing them for having abandoned him, just as he had punished the Egyptians by inflicting them upon the Egyptians. He was doing to them what he had threatened to do to the Egyptians, because they, like the Egyptians, had failed him. The Torah claimed to record these events as a warning to the Israelites to obey and fear Seth upon pain of extermination. The sacred animals of Seth are the black pig, the donkey, hippopotamus, crocodile, and the snake Apep, who battles with Ra the sun every night. The Israelites pretend that these, which are really their divine animals, are instead unclean, because the Israelites know that the Egyptians will force them to sacrifice their holy animals and eat them if they discover that the Israelites refrain from eating these delicious animals because they are precious to the Israelites' god Seth. The Israelites are aware that the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans are taught to wage war on all those who worship Seth and keep his divine animals sacred. The godly methods for defending the world from Seth is to force his people to sacrifice these his divine animals in their temples to Seth and eat them as the worshippers of Seth had done to the Egyptians. In other words, the process keeps flipping back and forth. First, the Egyptian rebels and the foreigners, the Hyksos who invaded Egypt, went into the temples of the Egyptians where they worshipped Horus and Apis and other beautiful gods, and they slaughtered the divine animals, made the priests, the Egyptian priests, sacrifice those holy animals and then eat them. They desecrated the temples of the Egyptians. They raped the Egyptian women. They massacred the Egyptian priests. They burned down the cities and the temples. So the Egyptians created spells and books of magic to counter this attack from Seth and from the foreigners and rebels who worship Seth. And they recorded these in the book of overthrowing Apep and in several other sacred books of spells and magic rituals that the Egyptians were to employ to counter Seth and to counter the minions of Seth. And you can find those in this book, Ancient Egyptian Ceremonies, Rituals, Incantations, and Ethics by Katerina Takachova. I'm sorry for butchering your name. Katerina Takachova. It's a very well done book, good translations. I recommend it. And the sections that I'm referring to are the Book of the Victory over Seth, which gives magic rituals to be performed and magical spells that will counter Seth and counter the followers of Seth. The Egyptians would force the followers of Seth to sacrifice their sacred animals, which were pigs, snakes, crocodiles, and asses, because Seth is the ass god. And in that way, they would defeat Seth. There's also the book of overthrowing Apep, right for overthrowing the foes of Ra. Words of power against the rebel. The followers of Seth were very much like the international communists, the Marxists. They rebelled against divine authority and against divine order. The king was the representation of the gods as the ruling structure and order of the heavens on earth. And the goal of the Sethians was to rebel against that divine order and impose chaos and darkness in place of light and order. And you can go through, I recommend that. Many pagans come to me asking what it is that they can do to counter the Abrahamic faiths, which worship Satan in the form of Yahweh. And that's what the Egyptians did. But that has led to a cycle of horrible violence in which the followers of Horus destroy the temples of the followers of Seth, force their priests to sacrifice the sacred animals of Seth to Horus and then eat those animals. The followers of Seth do the same. They destroy the temples of Horus in the various forms of the pagan gods, and they force the priests to eat the sacrificial animals. And that sacrificial animal ultimately became the Egyptians themselves, the firstborn, who in Christianity are consumed as the Eucharist of Christ. They are eating their sacred sacrificial animal. This is the way that the two faiths curse each other, punish each other, and attempt to destroy each other. Antiochus IV, in turn, did the same thing to the worshippers of Seth in the Jerusalem temple. He forced them to sacrifice a pig to Zeus and then consume the flesh of the pig. And then they retaliated against the Greeks, the Romans, and the Egyptians with the trick of Christianity, which then had them eat their sacrificial animal, which was Jesus Christ himself, representing themselves, and they were therefore committing mass suicide. The sacred animals of Seth are the black pig, the donkey, hippopotamus, crocodile, and the snake Apep, who battles with Ra the sun. The Israelites pretend that these, their divine animals, are unclean because they know that the Egyptians will force them to sacrifice their holy animals and eat them if they discover that the Israelites refrain from eating these delicious animals because they are precious to Seth. The Israelites are aware that the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans are taught to wage war on all those who worship Seth and keep his divine animals sacred. The godly method for defending the world from Seth is to force his people to sacrifice these animals in their temples and eat them as the worshippers of Seth had done to the Egyptians. This carried on into the Inquisition and beyond, where the Israelites were forced to consume pork to demonstrate that they had abandoned the worship of Satan. Antiochus Epiphanes IV did just that in order to save the world from Satan. Antiochus IV sacrificed a pig on the altar of the Israelite temple to Zeus and forced the priests to eat its flesh. The Roman Emperor Caligula planned to repeat the sacred ritual in order to exorcise the devil from the world, but he was assassinated before he could complete the task. That assassination was documented in Philo the Jew's books, where he talks about Gaius. The Israelites retaliated with Christianity. They tricked the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans into worshiping Seth's son Jesus and slaughtering and cursing their own ancestors' gods. They duped the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans into placing the human sacrifice of the crucifix atop the altars of the ancient pagan temples, which symbolized their own suicidal extermination. The unclean sacrifice the Gentiles made in their sacred temples was themselves. Deep and wide oceans of blood have been spilled in the battle between Seth and Horus for the souls of humanity. The Israelites are the champions of Seth. They plan to celebrate his and their victory with a wedding banquet at the end of the 6 days of creation, when the male aspect of Seth, the shadow of the black pig on the new moon, Yahweh, weds the female aspect of Seth, the shining full moon, Shekhinah, and the Godhead once again becomes androgynous. Seth was an androgynous god. He had a male aspect and a female aspect, represented by the dark side of the moon and the full moon. The behemoth pig will then be kosher for the Israelites to consume. So too will the Leviathan of Apep lay on the table of the great feast of the wedding banquet, which is why Seth battles Apophis each night while pretending to honor Ra, the sun, because he's going to slaughter the Leviathan so that his chosen people, the Israelites, can eat it and celebrate their victory and his reunification into an androgynous Godhead. Even the ripe wine of its blood will be safe for the Israelites to drink. The supposedly unclean animals of Israel are in fact their sacred animals. Kosher animals are the divine animals of the Egyptians who sacrificed themselves on the altar of Christianity and Islam while bowing to their idols and praying to Seth for forgiveness, which will not be given. The Israelites eat the animals which are sacred to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians slaughter the animals which are sacred to Seth, which the Israelites hold to be sacred and therefore do not consume. Even though they pretend that they are unclean, in the end they will reveal the fact that these are the divine animals, and then they will feel free to eat them openly in public. We don't need to abide by this crazy desert mythology of the Egyptians and the Israelites. We and our children are worth defending and preserving. If humanity will grow up and realize that our fate is in our own hands, we can stop the reciprocal destruction of the Abrahamic faiths which pit us against one another. We can live together in peace and prosperity and stop slaughtering each other as human sacrifices to Seth and Horus. In Egyptian mythology, the god of darkness, evil, and chaos, Seth, was married to his sister, Nephthys. Seth was unable to make Nephthys pregnant. Nephthys slept with Osiris, and they had a son, Anubis. Seth was angry at Osiris for sleeping with his wife and sister Nephthys, and Seth chopped Osiris into pieces. Isis reconstituted and resurrected Osiris, and they bore Horus, their son. Horus fought with and defeated Seth and became the chief god on earth. Osiris became the chief god of the afterlife, and Seth was basically enslaved by Ra to fight against Apep, the evil serpent of darkness. Seth and Horus had a homosexual relationship, and Horus impregnated Seth with Horus's seed. This story is retold in the Torah as the life story of Abraham, who is Seth, Abraham's wife and sister, who becomes who is Sarah and who serves and plays the role of Nephthys, and the Pharaoh, who is Osiris and Horus. I have discovered many parallels between the story of Abraham, Sarah, and the Pharaoh, and Seth, Nephthys, Osiris, and Horus, and other Egyptian myths and actual Egyptian history. I'm going to go over some of the things I found which relate to chapter 12 of Genesis. But what I've been reading to you and what I'm covering now is part of Volume 3 of my book series, Satanic Secrets of Jesus Christ. You can find volumes 1 and 2 on my website, cjbbooks.com. I am working on Volume 3, and your contributions are helping me to complete it. Thank you very much, and please contribute. So let's have a look at chapter 12 of Genesis, and I will read to you some of the things that I have in my book that I'm working on. This again is a draft version. I'm going to polish everything and improve it, and please do contribute because I need to keep going on this. Genesis chapter 12 from the New International Version. The call of Abram. The Lord, who is Seth, said to Abram, who is also playing the role of Seth. This is not unusual in the Old Testament. The Old Testament has archetypes and tells the same story over and over again with different characters, and different characters play different divine roles. The Lord, who is Seth, had said to Abraham, who is Seth, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." This represents Seth's decision to abandon Egypt and the Egyptians who had abandoned Seth, and adopt the Israelites as his, Seth's, Satan's, chosen people, and Canaan as his new holy land as opposed to Egypt. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." The notes say that could also be, quote, "be seen as blessed." "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." And the notes say, or earth / will use your name in blessings. See chapter 48, verse 20. And so Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Again, Abram is playing the role of Seth himself. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife, Sarah. Sarah is playing the role of Nephthys, who is the sister and wife of Seth. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. This is the Israelites appropriating Seth for themselves and making themselves the chosen people of Seth in place of the Egyptians, the firstborn Egyptians who are exterminated and replaced by the secondborn Israelites, just as Jacob steals firstborn Esau's birthright and blessings. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring," the notes say, or seed, "I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. Abram in Egypt. This is where the transfer takes place, where Abram, who is Seth, abandons the Egyptians who had abandoned him, adopts the Israelites who are to come as the chosen people who will be born from Abram's seed, and they will replace the Egyptians in the Egyptian empire. The capital will move to Jerusalem. The temple will move to Jerusalem. And as long as the Israelites show absolute obedience to Seth and worship him and help him to slay all the other gods of Egypt who had replaced him, especially Horus, who controlled the world with order and light, and Osiris, who controls the afterlife, if they can slaughter and destroy all that goodness and replace it with Seth's evilness, then they will become the chosen people and can rule the world from Jerusalem, the new capital in Canaan of the Egyptian empire. But it will still have the old borders of the Egyptian empire at the greatest extent of Ramses II's empire from the Nile to the Euphrates. And I give the proof of all that in my previous video. Abram in Egypt. Now there was a famine in the land, and this probably relates to the Hyksos and the legends of the Hyksos leaving Canaan and entering into Egypt. And the Hyksos were Seth worshippers. They were the foreigners that the Egyptians made all those books of spells to try to protect themselves from them. They were the foreigners who slaughtered the holy animals of the Egyptians and held the holy animals of Seth sacred. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram, who is Set, went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, I'm sorry for digressing, but I've noticed in a lot of sci-fi movies they create this myth of this alien god who is starving on his planet, so he comes to Earth. And I suspect that this is the source of that mythology of Abraham leaving the land in famine and traveling to Egypt. Okay, and Abram Seth went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. And he was about to enter Egypt. He said to his wife, Sarah, who is Nephthys, the wife and sister of Seth, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Abraham is an analog to Seth. Nephthys was both Seth's wife and sister, like Sarah. Seth was unable to father a child, so Nephthys slept with Osiris and then bore Anubis. Abraham plays the role of Seth, and Sarah is Nephthys, the wife and sister. Sarah slept with the Pharaoh, who is playing the role of Osiris, to Abraham's shame. The story of Abraham somewhat restores Seth's honor by making Sarah, his wife, barren instead of Abraham being infertile, like Seth was unable to impregnate Nephthys. Seth was an androgyne and could not make his wife Nephthys pregnant. Instead, Osiris impregnated Nephthys, and Seth and Horus had a homosexual relationship, and then Horus impregnated Seth by putting his seed into lettuce that he fed to Seth, so that Osiris and Horus became the parents of both children, the children of Seth himself and Anubis from Nephthys. Seth did not want to repeat what had happened with the firstborn Egyptians, with the second-born Israelites, whom he had now adopted as his chosen people. So the story has Abraham fathered children with the Egyptian woman Hagar and with his sister wife Sarah, the way that Osiris and Horus had fathered children with Nephthys and Seth. So Abraham is avoiding this fight with Horus and with Osiris, but he does plague the Pharaoh, who is playing the role of Osiris, who slept with his wife's sister. And let's read where that picks up. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw. When Abram, who is Seth, came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. In other words, Osiris lusted after Seth's wife and sister, Nephthys. And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. Seth tore Osiris to pieces for having slept with his sister wife Nephthys. This is reiterated as the story of Pharaoh being plagued by Abraham and Seth, and it is also retold by the 10 plagues on the Egyptians in the time of Moses, is again Seth enacting vengeance on Pharaoh, who is Osiris, for sleeping with his wife's sister. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. The Egyptians abandoned Seth worship and made Horus the chief god of the world and Osiris the god of the afterlife. Seth became angry, so he abandoned the Egyptians and left with the Israelites to make them his chosen people and to eventually have them conquer the world and rule it from the Egyptian empire, with the capital moved to Jerusalem. So this is the story of Osiris and Horus ordering out the foreigners who worship Seth, and it is being retold in the story of Abraham. Thank you very much for watching. I want to thank the contributors who made this video possible. Again, please do contribute. I very much depend upon your contributions to put up these free videos and to share this important research with you. I'm evidently the only person in 2,500 years who has figured this all out. I thank you very much for your interest in what I have to say, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.